The rain had turned the London park into a battlefield of puddles and mud. Commuters hurried past beneath umbrellas, their coats pulled tight, their faces locked on the pavements ahead. No one noticed the small overturned wheelchair by the edge of the path. Inside the muddy chaos lay a 6-year-old boy named Oliver Hale, face pressed against the cold ground, tears mixing with the rain. His thin arms trembled as he tried to push himself up, but his muscles refused to obey. Born with spinal muscular atrophy, he had learned early that life rarely waited for those who could not walk. "Help!" he cried again, his voice barely rising above the downpour. But people only moved faster, pretending not to hear. A woman in a business suit even stepped around him, muttering something about being late for her train. For a moment, Oliver thought he might disappear right there, swallowed by the storm and by everyone's indifference. Then he heard a small splash, a different rhythm cutting through the rain. A pair of worn trainers stopped beside him. "Hey, are you okay?" He turned his head. A little girl, maybe 7, looked down at him. Her brown hair stuck to her face. Her jacket was 2 sizes too big. The soles of her shoes were held together with tape. Yet there was something fierce in her eyes, a mixture of fearlessness and kindness. "I can't get up," Oliver admitted, ashamed. Without hesitation, she dropped her ragged school bag and stepped into the mud. "Name's Grace," she said simply, as if they'd met on a sunny playground instead of a storm-soaked park. "I'll help you up, but I'm warning you, we're both getting filthy." He wanted to protest, but she laughed, a sound so pure that for a second even the rain seemed to soften. Together she braced her small frame against the heavy chair, her thin arms straining. "Blimey, this thing's heavier than my dad after football." She joked, then bit her lip as if she'd said too much. Oliver smiled despite the mud. "It's a special chair. My dad says it costs more than most cars." Grace whistled. "Fancy that! My bike's made out of 3 broken ones. My neighbor helped me build it." For a moment they stood in the rain. A billionaire's son and a girl from nowhere, 2 children who should never have met. And yet, in that brief defiance of the storm, something invisible and unexplainable connected them. Neither of them knew that this small act of courage, a muddy hand reaching for another, would one day expose secrets powerful enough to shake everything they thought they knew about family, loyalty, and destiny. The voice carried power, not loud by volume, but by the kind that silences everything around it. Grace turned and saw a man running through the rain, his long coat dark with water, his polished shoes ruined in the mud. His presence seemed to part the storm itself. "Dad," Oliver breathed, relief and fear mixed in his voice. The man knelt without caring for the mud or the price of his tailored suit. "Are you hurt?" His hands moved over Oliver's arms, checking for injuries. Behind him, a nervous-looking driver hovered, holding a large black umbrella. "I'm fine," Oliver said quietly. "Grace helped me." It was then that Jonathan Hale, CEO of Hale Technologies, a name that appeared daily in the London business pages, finally saw the girl standing awkwardly in the rain. Her clothes clung to her, her shoes squelched with every step, but her chin was held high. "You helped my son?" His tone softened. Grace shrugged. "Anyone would have." Her eyes flicked toward the passing crowd, the people who hadn't. "Well, anyone should have." Jonathan's jaw tightened. That simple truth hit him harder than any accusation could. He stood and nodded toward his driver. "Get a blanket." As the driver hurried back to the car, Jonathan looked at Grace again. "What's your name, young lady?" "Grace Miller, sir." "And your parents?" Her expression faltered. "Mom's at work. Dad's probably home."
The hesitation was quick but noticeable. Oliver tugged at his father's sleeve. "Can we drive her home, Dad? Please? It's pouring." Jonathan hesitated for only a moment before he nodded. "Of course." He turned to Grace. "It's the least we can do." Grace's instinct told her to say no. People from her world didn't climb into cars like his, but when she saw Oliver shiver, she nodded. "All right. Just a ride." The black Bentley purred through the streets, the rain drumming against its windows. Grace sat at the edge of the leather seat, afraid to move, afraid even to breathe too deeply. The interior smelled of cedar and money. "So," Jonathan said gently, "where do you live, Grace?" "Eastfield Estate," she answered, naming one of London's most forgotten corners. The kind of place where lifts never worked and windows wore metal bars. Jonathan exchanged a glance with his driver, subtle but meaningful. Oliver broke the silence. "Grace, are you in school?" "Yes, sir. St. Mary's Primary. But I'm in the advanced maths group," she added quickly, as if to prove something. Jonathan smiled faintly. "That doesn't surprise me." When they reached the estate, Grace shifted nervously. "You can stop here," she said as they turned into the grey courtyard of her building. "I'll walk the rest." "Nonsense," Jonathan replied. "We'll see you home." He stepped out carrying Oliver in his arms, ignoring the curious stares from the windows above. The building smelled of rain, concrete, and fatigue.
Grace led them up the narrow stairs, 3 floors, past peeling paint and broken mailboxes, until she stopped outside a door with faded numbers, flat 3C. "Mom?" she called. "It's me?" The door opened. A woman in a waitress uniform looked up, startled to find a drenched billionaire and his son standing on her doorstep. For a moment no one spoke. Then Grace whispered, almost apologetically, "Mom, this is Mr. Hale and Oliver. He fell in the park. I just helped."
The woman blinked, recognition dawning in her tired eyes. "Mr. Hale, as in Hale Technologies?" Jonathan nodded slightly. "Your daughter did something most adults wouldn't. You should be proud." Helen Miller's face softened, a mixture of pride and exhaustion. "I always am, sir," she said quietly. But before anyone could speak again, a heavy voice rumbled from the hallway behind her. "And who exactly is this, then?" Grace froze. Her father had woken up. The smell of cheap lager drifted into the doorway before the man himself appeared. Patrick Miller was large, unshaven, his eyes glassy and uncertain. "Who the hell's this?" he growled, swaying slightly as he took in the scene. His daughter, a stranger in a drenched overcoat, and a boy in a wheelchair who looked like a porcelain doll in the middle of their grey hallway. "Patrick," Helen said quickly, "this is Mr. Hale and his son Oliver. Grace helped him in the park." Patrick's expression flickered from confusion to calculation. "Helped, did she?" He leaned on the doorframe, his grin uneven. "That's my girl, always looking after others, aren't you, Gracie?" Gracie's cheeks colored. "Dad, please." Jonathan's tone remained calm, but the firmness beneath it was unmistakable. "Your daughter showed more courage than most adults I know. You should be proud." Patrick's eyes narrowed. "Oh, I am. She's a good kid. She's a good Tucson." "So, Mr. Fancy Suit," he said, his tone turning slick. "What's this about then? You lot handing out medals to kids now?" "Dad!" Grace snapped. But Jonathan only gave a polite smile, the kind perfected by men used to boardrooms and journalists. "No medals," he said, "just gratitude." The silence that followed was awkward and heavy. Then Jonathan crouched beside Oliver's chair again. "Ready to go home, son?" Oliver nodded. But before leaving, he looked at Grace. "Can we see her again, Dad?" Jonathan hesitated. It was a question that didn't belong to a single rainy afternoon. "Perhaps," he said quietly, then turned to Helen. "Mrs. Miller, may I speak with you a moment?" She stepped into the hall, clutching a tea towel like armor. Of course, Mr. Hale. Your daughter is bright, exceptionally so. Oliver's tutor has seen children like her before, rare ones. I'd like to help her get into St. Edmund's Academy, the school my daughter attends. It's selective, but with the right support, she'd fit in. Helen blinked, stunned. Sir, that's a private school. We could never... You wouldn't have to, he interrupted softly. It would be a scholarship, full coverage, books, uniforms, everything. For a long moment, the rain outside filled the silence between them. Then Patrick's voice broke in, suddenly smooth. Well, that's generous, isn't it? Our little Grace going to school with the posh kids. He stepped forward, his hand on Helen's shoulder, too tightly. Of course, we'll think about it, won't we, love? Helen flinched but nodded. Yes, we'll think about it. Jonathan handed her his card. Take your time. Call me when you decide. As he turned to leave, Grace blurted out, Thank you, Mr. Hale. He smiled at her. Not the polished CEO smile, but something softer. Don't thank me yet, Grace. Just promise me you'll never stop being the kind of person who stops for someone in the rain. Outside, the Bentley waited with its engine humming. The city reflected in its glossy panels. Oliver looked back through the window as the car pulled away. Grace stood in the doorway beside her mother while her father lingered behind them, expression unreadable. Dad, Oliver said quietly. You really think she'll come to our house? Jonathan watched the lights of Eastfield blur into the drizzle. If she's half as brave as I think she is, he murmured, then yes, she will. The letter was thick, its paper heavy enough to suggest importance. Grace turned it over in her hands again and again, unable to believe the gold-embossed crest that gleamed at the top. The Hale Residence, Kensington Gardens. Her mother read it twice, her lips moving silently over each line. Private science exhibition hosted by Mr. Jonathan Hale for young students and their families, she murmured. He wants you to come. Grace's father grunted from the sofa without looking up from the television. Sounds posh. Don't mess it up. Patrick, Helen began, but he waved her off. Just saying, rich people don't do things for free. Grace bit her lip. Maybe he just wants to thank me, her father snorted. Then he can send a card. But on Sunday morning, despite everything, Helen ironed the only decent dress Grace had. Keep your chin up, she whispered, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. You belong wherever kindness took you. The Hale mansion looked like something out of another world. A white stone palace surrounded by manicured lawns and fountains that shimmered under the early afternoon light. A security guard met them at the gate. Mrs. Miller and Grace? He nodded. You're expected. Please follow the drive. The car carried them slowly along a path lined with roses. When they stopped, Grace saw Jonathan waiting at the entrance, dressed simply but with a kind of effortless refinement that only money could afford. Grace, Mrs. Miller, he greeted warmly. I'm glad you came. Inside, the house felt almost unreal. High ceilings, marble floors, the faint scent of polished wood and rain on glass. Dozens of guests mingled in the conservatory where a glass dome let sunlight fall on tables filled with gleaming instruments. Oliver rolled forward the moment he saw her. Grace, you made it, he said, beaming. You've got to see this. We built a Tesla coil. It can sing. Grace's eyes widened as small blue arcs danced between the metallic rods. That's incredible, she whispered. Papa says I should study with Professor Wilson when I'm older, Oliver continued proudly. Before Grace could answer, a voice as sharp as a violin string sliced through the air. You're the girl from the park, aren't you? Grace turned. Standing a few steps away was a girl about her age, blonde hair, perfectly curled, wearing a dress that probably cost more than everything in Grace's flat combined. Her expression was polite, but her eyes weren't. "I'm Emily Hale," she said, extending a gloved hand just far enough to make refusal rude. "Oliver's sister." Grace took it carefully. "I'm Grace Miller." "I know," Emily replied with the faintest smile. "Father's been quite taken with your story." The words landed heavier than they sounded. Jonathan, standing across the room, noticed the tension but said nothing. Helen was speaking with a woman in a navy suit, the headmistress of St. Edmund's Academy, though she didn't yet realize it. Professor Wilson soon invited the children forward. "Who'd like to help me demonstrate electrical resonance?" Before Emily could step up, Oliver called, "Grace can do it. She loves science." Every eye turned. Grace hesitated, but Jonathan nodded reassuringly. She touched the control switch and the coil began to hum, releasing small flashes of light that danced in rhythm like music. Gasps filled the room, and for a moment Grace forgot she was the poor girl from Eastfield Estate. She was simply herself. Only one person didn't clap. Emily watched, her smile fading as the room filled with admiration, not for her, but for the stranger who had walked in from the rain. The conservatory was almost empty now. The chatter had thinned into polite goodbyes, the smell of sugared pastries lingering in the air. Grace stood near the chocolate fountain, clutching a napkin she no longer needed. The marble floors reflected the last golden light of afternoon, making the house look like a dream dissolving into dusk. Emily's voice came from behind her, smooth and practiced. "So, everyone's talking about you?" Grace turned slowly. "About me?" Emily tilted her head, her smile perfectly trained. "Father's little miracle, the brave girl from Eastfield who helped the poor disabled boy in the park." She gave a delicate shrug. "Quite the fairy tale." Grace frowned. "I didn't do it for attention." "I'm sure you didn't." Emily's tone softened, but her eyes were sharp. "But attention has a way of finding you, doesn't it? First my brother, now my father, then our headmistress." Grace didn't answer. The fountain gurgled quietly between them, filling the silence with sweetness and threat. "You don't belong here," Emily said finally, her voice so low that only Grace could hear. "These people aren't your kind, and you'll find out soon enough that kindness from my father usually comes with a price." Grace's throat tightened. Maybe the only price is believing someone can do good without expecting anything back. Emily's smile faltered, just for a second. Then she turned, her curls catching the light. "We'll see." Across the room, Jonathan Hale was finishing a quiet conversation with Helen Miller. "Grace is extraordinary," he said. "If she joins St. Edmund's, I'll personally see to it that she has everything she needs." Helen's gratitude was sincere but nervous. "You've already done too much, Mr. Hale. We're not used to generosity." "Then start getting used to it," he said gently. "Your daughter reminds me of someone I once knew." Before Helen could ask who, a small cough interrupted them. Professor Wilson approached with Oliver beside him. "Jonathan," he said quietly, "Oliver's looking pale again. I think the excitement might have been too much." Jonathan knelt beside his son immediately. "You all right, mate?" Oliver managed a weak smile. "Just tired." Grace hurried over. "Do you want me to get water?" Oliver shook his head. "You should come back next week. We're building a model rocket." She nodded eagerly. "I'd love that." Emily, watching from a distance, said nothing. But her hand clenched the edge of the dessert table until her knuckles whitened. That night, when the Millers returned home, the rain had started again. Helen carried Grace's damp coat to the hook by the door, her face troubled. "Did something happen?" she asked softly. Grace hesitated, remembering Emily's warning, Jonathan's strange look when he'd mentioned someone he once knew, and the way Oliver had gone pale under the lights. "Nothing," she said finally. "Just a strange day." But as she lay awake in bed later, the storm whispering against the windows, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. as if one good deed had opened a door she wasn't meant to find. The car outside their building looked almost out of place. Sleek, black, polished to a mirror shine, its engine purring like a cat that knew it belonged elsewhere. Helen Miller opened the door cautiously, wiping her hands on a dishcloth. "Mrs. Miller?" the man asked, his accent clipped, his coat too fine for Eastfield Estate. "I'm from Mr. Hale's office. He asked me to deliver this personally." He handed her a thick envelope embossed with the Hale Technologies crest, then turned and left without another word. Grace appeared at her mother's side. "Mum, what is it?" Helen hesitated, her thumb trembling as she broke the seal. Inside were 2 letters. The first bore the elegant handwriting she already recognized. "Dear Mrs. Miller, I've spoken with St. Edmund's Academy. They've agreed to offer Grace a full scholarship beginning this term. The details of her uniform and transport are arranged. Additionally, there's accommodation available on my estate, a guest cottage, while repairs are carried out in your building. It's only temporary, of course, but it would provide stability for Grace's studies. Sincerely, Jonathan Hale." Helen's hand went to her mouth. "A cottage on his estate?" Patrick's voice came from behind them, thick with disbelief. "He wants us to move in with him?" "It says guest cottage," Helen replied, her voice low, "just while the building's being fixed." Patrick snatched the letter, squinting at the words. "And since when does a billionaire hand out houses to waitresses and their brats?" "Don't, Dad," Grace said sharply. "He's just being kind." Patrick chuckled darkly. "Kind, is he? There's always something in it for people like that." He leaned closer to Helen, his breath sour with stale beer. "Maybe he wants to feel like God, saving the poor. Or maybe he just wants something else entirely." Helen stepped back. "Enough, Patrick." For a long moment the flat was silent except for the hum of the old refrigerator. Then Grace spoke. "Mom, I want to go. Please. Just to study. I'll make you proud." Helen looked at her daughter. The same eyes that used to stare at the stars from their tiny window, dreaming of something bigger. She sighed. "All right. We'll try it." The Hale estate rose from the countryside like something out of a painting. Ivy-covered stone, gardens that rolled down to a private lake. When the Millers arrived, Jonathan himself came to greet them, dressed casually, though everything about him still whispered control and confidence. "Welcome," he said warmly. "This place has been empty too long. It could use some life." Grace stepped through the doorway, her eyes wide. The air smelled of polished wood and lavender. On the mantel stood a framed photograph of 2 children, a much younger Emily and Oliver laughing in sunlight that felt almost unreal. "Mr. Hale," she asked quietly, "why are you doing all this?" He smiled faintly, but something in his eyes flickered. "Because, Grace," he said, "sometimes life gives you a chance to fix what once went wrong." Grace didn't understand. Not yet, but the way he said it sent a chill down her spine. The cottage creaked softly as the wind rolled across the estate. Grace moved through the narrow hallway, her bare feet whispering against the wooden floor. Everyone else had gone to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. The silence here was too deep, too foreign. A single lamp burned by the staircase, casting a thin pool of amber light. That was when she saw it, the portrait. It hung above the first landing. A woman in a white lab coat, eyes lifted towards something unseen. The brushstrokes were delicate, but what struck Grace wasn't the artistry. It was the face. Same hazel eyes, same shape of jaw. The resemblance was uncanny. Beneath the frame, a small brass plaque read, "Dr. Sarah Hale, 1989, 2015. Grace felt the world narrow around her. She reached out, tracing the outline of the woman's smile. "Who were you?" she whispered. The next morning, she asked Jonathan about it over breakfast. Mr. Hale, the woman in the painting, was she family? Jonathan's knife paused mid-cut. For a heartbeat, his mask slipped. She was my sister, he said quietly. A scientist. Brilliant. Too brilliant, maybe. Emily looked up from her toast, her expression unreadable. She died before Oliver was born, she added flatly. Father doesn't like to talk about it. Jonathan gave his daughter a warning glance. That's enough, Emily. Grace felt a shiver crawl up her spine. The conversation ended there, but questions hung in the air like dust motes. That afternoon, while Helen unpacked linens in the guest room, a knock came at the door. It was Oliver, pale but smiling, holding a small telescope. Want to see the stars tonight? He asked. My Aunt Sarah used to show me constellations. Dad says I have her eyes. Grace froze. Your aunt? He nodded. She used to work on something big, space stuff. But she died in an accident. At least, that's what they tell me. His tone shifted, quiet, uncertain. Sometimes I think Dad knows more than he says. They set the telescope up near the window as twilight bled across the gardens. Through the lens, the sky was a sea of silver dots. Grace leaned closer. They look alive, she murmured. Oliver smiled faintly. Sarah used to say the same thing. Later that night, Grace found her mother sitting by the window, a letter half hidden in her lap. Mom? Helen startled, folding the paper too quickly. Nothing, love, just an old letter from work. But Grace caught a glimpse of the heading before it disappeared. University of Cambridge, Department of Astrophysics. Mum, she whispered, why does that woman look like me? Helen's face drained of color. Go to bed, Grace. Grace didn't move. You knew her, didn't you? Her mother's hands trembled. Tomorrow, she said finally. Tomorrow I'll tell you everything. The morning air was unnaturally still. Grace pushed open her mother's door. The bed was untouched, the wardrobe open, only a faint scent of lavender remained. Mum, she whispered. No answer. Downstairs, Jonathan Hale stood by the French doors, his overcoat still damp. The look on his face made Grace's heart lurch. She's gone, he said quietly. Left before sunrise. Where? I don't know. He hesitated, his eyes flickering towards the portrait on the staircase. But I think it has something to do with Sarah. Emily appeared behind him, her arms folded. You think? Or you know? She asked sharply. This is what happens when you bring strangers into our house. Enough, Emily, Jonathan snapped. This isn't about you. Isn't it? She fired back. She turns up, Mum's photo vanishes from the hall, and now our guest has disappeared. How convenient. Grace's voice shook. Your mother? Jonathan rubbed a hand over his face. Emily's mother died years ago. Sarah, my sister, helped raise her. She was brilliant, until she started something she couldn't finish. What was it? Grace asked. Something the government wanted to own, he said. A propulsion model. Technology that could change how humanity reached the stars. She called it the Genesis engine, but she refused to sell it. Then the lab explosion happened. They said it was an accident. His eyes darkened. I never believed that. Grace's hands trembled. And my mum? What does she have to do with it? Jonathan exhaled as if the air itself weighed tons. Because your mother, Helen, wasn't always a waitress. He turned toward the shelves behind him, pulled out a folder wrapped in grey paper. She was Sarah's research partner. Grace stared. No? She would have told me. She tried to keep you safe, he said. When the explosion happened, she vanished with Sarah's notes. I thought she was dead too, until I saw you. He looked at her closely now, as if seeing her for the first time. The same eyes, the same face. I thought you were Sarah when you stood in the rain that day. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the hills. Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling between anger and disbelief. So what are you saying, Father? That she's our cousin? Some ghost from your past? Before anyone could answer, the sound of tires crunching on gravel cut through the tension. A black car pulled up beside the fountain. 2 men stepped out. Suits, earpieces, unreadable faces. Jonathan's expression hardened. They found us! He turned to Grace. Listen to me. Sarah hid the data on a device. Something small, coded to her DNA. If your mother has it, they'll come for both of you. Grace's pulse raced. She left without saying goodbye. Maybe she knew this would happen. Jonathan grabbed his coat. Then we'll find her first. They drove through the rain, the Bentley's headlights slicing the grey morning. Emily sat in the back seat, silent and pale. Oliver, too weak to come, had been left under guard. When they reached the edge of the city, Grace spotted a figure standing near the old observatory. Her mother, soaked through, clutching a small silver locket. "Mum!" Helen turned, her face drawn, eyes full of both fear and relief. "Grace, stay back." A dark van appeared at the far end of the lane. Men in suits stepped out. Jonathan pulled Grace behind him. "Run!" But Helen shook her head. "No more running." She opened the locket. Inside was a tiny chip glowing faintly blue. "This is what they killed Sarah for. I won't let them take it again." One of the men raised a weapon.
In that frozen second, Jonathan moved, not as a billionaire, but as a brother trying to finish a promise. He threw himself between them. The shot cracked the air. Grace screamed. The men fled as sirens wailed in the distance. Helen dropped to her knees beside Jonathan. "Hold on." He looked up at her, and at Grace. "She has your courage," he whispered. "Keep it safe. Both of you." His hand fell still. Days later, the papers called it a robbery gone wrong.
But those who knew the Hales understood better. Grace stood beneath the stars with Oliver, who was now recovering slowly. Emily lingered a few steps away. No longer an enemy, but not yet a friend. "Do you think he found peace?" Grace asked softly. Oliver pointed upward. "He's probably building rockets somewhere up there." Grace smiled through her tears. "Then we'll finish what they started. For him, for Sarah, for Mum." The wind shifted, carrying the faint hum of the observatory's machines. And above them, one star burned brighter than all the rest, like an answer waiting to be found.